This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a run through the markets that we follow on the program. So all the African bourses we follow here, except the Nigerian market, closed higher in Monday's trading session. The JSE had an interesting session. It did close high, and that's despite mining companies like Goldfields, Anglo American, AngloGold, all closing lower by anywhere between 0.7 to nearly 4%. In the red. Ethiopia is also putting out a formal EOI for the 40% of Ethio Telecom it wants to sell. That's coming out tomorrow. Further afield, Novavax had some good news to the markets today. Phase 3 trials of its COVID-19 vaccine candidate indicate that it was 90% effective, including against mutated variants of SARS-CoV-2. That Phase 3 trial had some 30,000 participants in Mexico and the US. The company says it will be able to produce 100 million doses each month by the end of September. Its shares were about 2.3% higher at 11:30 GMT. Here's what's coming up tonight. Tanzania does an abrupt 180 on its stand on cryptocurrencies. Small businesses have taken quite a hit as the Twitter ban continues in Nigeria. And the world's 7 most advanced economies pledged to raise $100 billion a year in financing to help poorer countries cut their carbon emissions. We'll be diving into the details of the story in just a moment. But let's start the hour tonight in Tanzania, where President Samia Suluhu Hassan has called on the central bank to start working on facilitating the widespread use of cryptocurrencies in the East African nation. Now, while many Tanzanians have not yet embraced decentralized finance, the president said in a speech over the weekend that the central bank should be ready for these changes and should not be caught unprepared. Now, his speech came fresh off the back of El Salvador also announcing the formal adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender just last week. That announcement helped Bitcoin gain nearly 10% in barely 24 hours, cracking the $40,000 mark on Monday. Now, the token has also been buoyed on news that Tesla would resume its use of Bitcoin, but only when there's proof that the asset is obtained, or mined really, by using around 50% clean energy. Right, then let's dig a little deeper into the details of these developments in the last 24 hours. Haroon Kola is a Stacks community builder at Stacks Africa. Joins us now live on the line from Johannesburg. So, Haroon, let's start with a broad picture here, because back in 2019, the Bank of Tanzania put out a formal notice banning the use of cryptocurrencies at the time. But despite that, based on the data you're seeing, has crypto mining and use risen or fallen in Tanzania?
Well, definitely the sale of cryptocurrency on off-exchange platforms like Local Bitcoins, which is a peer-to-peer buying and selling platform, has just increased in that time. And Africans are a typical use case of crypto, not just for speculative reasons, but for actual sending money and using it in day-to-day transactions. So normal, everyday working people in Africa, Tanzania, have been using Bitcoin by Local Bitcoins all this time, and it's growing.
Okay, so Tanzania, of course, is not one of the largest markets for cryptocurrency trading or mining, at least on the continent, but Bitcoin has gone over $40,600 today. Is there a case to be made that the market might be reading a bit too much in this change of policy from the president, because it really hasn't translated into an effective change in stance from the BOT yet?
No, and I think the technical reasons for the price going up or down is not necessarily limited to one piece of news. So even a succession of them, like the Tesla announcement, or even like El Salvador announcing it as legal tender, it has run up really quickly until 64,000 and falling down to 30,000. So if you look at that as a normal, healthy correction in a bull market, and I think with the news of a country actually adopting it as legal tender, it's been like news that us Bitcoin plebs have been wanting to hear for a decade now. And it could be that prices are going on this euphoria of the market. But other than that, I think it's just healthy price discovery in an adopting market.
Indeed, we just have to get used to the volatility here. So one last question for you. So the president basically saying, look, the BOT should not be caught unprepared by, and she's asking for policy changes to be made here. But in real terms, from a crypto perspective, what sort of policy changes will that imply for the Bank of Tanzania? Because it's not like they're going to wake up tomorrow morning and say Bitcoin and Ethereum are legal tender overnight. So what policy changes in the interim can happen?
Well, it's interesting how you phrase that question from a crypto perspective. What should the policy be? Crypto is purely decentralized, and its governance is not related to a central authority making the decisions. But however, they could take the lead of what El Salvador is doing. They're buying about $100 million worth of Bitcoin to keep as a reserve so that merchants can directly convert that Bitcoin they're receiving into US dollars. So they wouldn't have to do anything drastically policy-wise. They just need to keep like a stash of Bitcoin. They need to be hodlers of last resort. And now we are seeing that central banks are doing that. I think we're going to see like a domino of other central banks, especially third countries, allowing their central banks to own Bitcoin on balance sheet.
Well, that's going to be an interesting change if it does happen. We'll have to wait and see. Central banks over here tend to be very, very wary of cryptocurrency. Harun Kola, thank you very much. Now, e-commerce is helping to soften the economic blow of COVID-19 in Uganda. But as CGTN's Michael Beleke now explores, analysts say that the cost of internet access is hindering the growth of e-commerce in the East African nation.
Joyce Kisache looks up a new customer order on her phone. She's signed up to Jumia Foods, an e-commerce mobile platform, where she's able to sell her fruits and vegetables to both walk-in and online clients.
Some customers don't want to come to the market because they don't want to get stuck in traffic. Parking is also a problem, so the application is convenient for the trader and helps to keep your customer.
Joyce has been operating on the online platform for more than a year now. The COVID-19 pandemic has made e-commerce applications even more essential. During lockdown, strict guidelines like restrictions on transport forced many vendors to close their stalls. But many like Joyce, who signed up to e-commerce, were able to work online.
When the pandemic started, we only got a few walk-ins. People were scared of coming to the market to mix with crowds, so they started ordering whatever they needed online. And it worked for us, who installed the application.
The growth of e-commerce is partly attributed to a boom in e-payment solutions in recent years. The value of mobile money transactions has grown from $12.5 billion in 2016 to about $27 billion in 2020, according to figures from the Bank of Uganda. A partnership between the UN, e-commerce companies and government has also helped many vendors sign up.
We've seen vendors benefit tremendously. We have vendors who are earning $10 a day in revenue and in sales, but thanks to the partnership and selling their produce online, they're earning over $50 a day. So I believe that, of course, helped them as business owners sustain their businesses, save more, and again maintain their livelihood.
The platform has also created jobs and sustained livelihoods of thousands of riders who deliver the products on motorcycles. COVID-19 has given e-commerce in Uganda a huge boost, with a number of digital trade solutions on the rise to help people adapt to the new normal. This is also helping to open up the untapped potential of Uganda's online marketplace. But economic analysts argue that despite the growth in e-commerce, taxes on internet subscriptions are driving up online transaction costs.
One of the challenges that has been facing Africa and Uganda inclusive when it comes to penetrating online markets is the cost of internet, affordability, availability.
In the current budget, Uganda plans to slap a 12% tax on the internet. But vendors like Joyce Kisache believe the taxes will have minimal impact on their businesses because they are hoping to pass on the cost to the consumer. Michael Beleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Also, Ethiopia's launched a tendering process for the proposed sell-off of a 40% stake in the state-owned carrier Ethio Telecom. Interested investors have a month starting from the 15th of June to submit their responses said the expression of interest. That's the first of a series of stages that will lead on to the picking of a successful bidder. The EOI, for the record, comes out later on tomorrow. Now, the sale of this minority stake in Ethio Telecom comes on the heels of a new telecommunications license awarded to a consortium that includes Kenya's Safaricom just last month. Opening up the sector is part of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's plan to attract a lot more foreign capital to come into the country and to also maintain one of the fastest economic growth rates on the continent while creating more jobs that the economy desperately needs. Ethio Telecom generated revenues of about $600 million in the 6 months through December. It has about 53 million subscribers in the country. Egypt has signed about $2 billion worth of deals with France to fund projects in the transportation, infrastructure, electricity and wholesale sectors. Of that financing, roughly $940 million will come from the French government. Another $1.2 billion will come from AFD, the French Development Agency. Projects announced on Sunday by the cabinet include those that focus on sanitation stations. There's also a number that focus on the rail sector, including the provision of 55 new cars for the Cairo Metro's oldest line. That line is used by over 1 million commuters every day. It has dilapidated carriages that are over 3 decades old. The signings came during a visit by the French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire to Cairo.
I came here to accelerate and strengthen economic cooperation between Egypt and France following President Sisi's state visit to France last December, when it was decided between President Macron and President Sisi to strengthen economic ties for the benefit of both countries. This has been done, so we have been working for 6 months, working hard to open new contracts and to finalize existing ones, particularly in the field of transport. So today we have signed 4 billion euros of financial commitments for economic relations between France and Egypt.
Better news from the fixed income market. Egypt is among 13 countries included in the new FTSE Russell Frontier Emerging Markets Government Bond Index series that tracks local currency bond markets. Authorities in the North African state said that Egypt's inclusion in it will enable it to attract about $4 billion in new capital into the government security market. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has this update from Cairo.
The newly established FTSE Russell Index is seen by some as a guideline for investors in the emerging markets. Egypt, together with 4 other African nations, has been placed on the list based on its strong economic performance amid the crisis caused by the coronavirus pandemic.
There are many factors to be considered before getting listed in the index, but the main ones are transparency and the ability to fulfill obligations and loan repayments, which Egypt has proved to be trustworthy in. Countries always seek to be listed because it gives them easier access to bonds and treasury bills and at a lower cost and interest than other loan mechanisms. It's proof of strength and good reputation within the international business community.
The North African country has been on an international borrowing spree since 2016 to implement an aggressive economic reform plan, followed by measures to contain the economic downturn caused by the outbreak of the pandemic. Egypt's finance minister has said the FTSE Russell Index will enable Egypt to attract up to $4 billion of government bonds.
These bonds can be used to cover the public debt or pay interests and loans on Egypt. Part of it can be directed towards the reconstruction sector, which has witnessed fast growth as the government transforms the country into a regional trade and investments hub.
After the successful FTSE bonds listing, Cairo is now awaiting to be re-enlisted in the JP Morgan Index for emerging markets, which will enable it to be eligible for another $2 billion of bonds. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Quick run through the company headlines. Starting in East Africa, the Kenyan retail chain Naivas is partnering with the International Finance Corporation to improve food standards in its 71 stores as it aims to meet and in some cases exceed international standards. The retailer recently set up an environmental health and food safety department to monitor the quality of the meat, milk and vegetables it sells in its outlets. Naivas says its objective is to build its brand and win customers' confidence in a world where food safety is a growing matter of great concern. Alexander Forbes is selling its life insurance business over to Sanlam. That agreement will see Sanlam acquire the South African retirement and investment advisors' risk in retail life insurance business for about $7 million. The transaction, however, is still subject to certain conditions and the approval of competition authorities. Alexander Forbes has been in the process of getting out of the insurance space for some time now. Further afield, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says that the kingdom will sell more shares of its energy giant Saudi Aramco in the years to come. However, he did not specify a time frame in which the sale will take place or what percentage of the world's biggest energy company shares will be sold in the future. Saudi Aramco raised about $6 billion just last week through a dollar-denominated sukuk. The state-controlled firm is raising cash in part to meet its massive $75 billion annual dividend and also to reduce its debt load. And finally, McDonald's is the latest large firm to be hit by a data breach that has exposed some clients' details. The world's largest burger chain says that cyber attackers accessed what they described as, and I'm quoting here, a small number of files on customers in South Korea and Taiwan. The exact number wasn't specified. The breach included the release of emails, delivery addresses, phone numbers, but not payment details. Operations at its restaurants, however, were not affected by this cyber attack. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Small businesses continue to take a hit as the Twitter ban continues in Nigeria. And Tunisia is hosting the 6th edition of its olive oil exhibition as exports grow.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Scores of SMEs across Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and also home to its largest economy, are reeling from the indefinite suspension of the social media giant Twitter. Here's CGTN's Alexander Majala looking at the ban's effect on entrepreneurs in West Africa.
Lagos-based entrepreneur Ogechi Egemonu was selling more than $1,200 worth of watches, shoes and handbags on Twitter per week. Now, with the site suspended by the Nigerian government, Egemonu does not know how she will cope.
Since the ban, I have not been able to post to my customers. I've not been able to reach out to my existing customers. I've not been able to get new customers. I've not been able to put images of restocked items.
Nigeria announced the move on June 4th, 2 days after the platform removed a post from President Muhammadu Buhari that threatened to punish regional separatists. Most telecommunication sites have blocked access.
I know for sure it's been very damaging because a lot of firms run on ad campaigns. A lot of business opportunity has been created just by the whole influencer thing on Twitter. People make money, people spend money. It's kind of like a mini ecosystem on its own. And then just snatching that away from Nigerians is kind of unfair.
NOI polls estimates that 39.6 million Nigerians use Twitter, 20% of them for business advertisement and 18% to look for employment opportunities. Experts warn its lack of ready availability, as it's accessible using a virtual private network that masks location, could ripple across the economy. Parliament's Minority Caucus warned that the suspension was costing Nigerians billions on a daily basis.
We're looking at potential loss in their revenue, looking at potential loss, and then the ripple effect would be on output growth, because if manufacturing sector is affected, if businesses are affected, if trade sector is affected, we're looking at potential, decline in economic growth and then economic development. Why? Because the standard of living will be a lot worse compared to the cost of living.
The suspension will hit young Nigerians hardest, among whom there's a 45% unemployment rate. The government last week said that all social media sites must register a local entity and get a license to operate, citing complaints over lost money as proof that the ban was effective. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
The port of Mombasa in Kenya has continuously registered growth in cargo throughput, except for 2020, where cargo output declined due to the COVID-19 pandemic. During the period January to December last year, the total cargo throughput was 34.12 million metric tons against 34.44 million tons the previous year. So you're looking at a marginal decline there of nearly 1%. Container traffic was down 4% to 1.36 million TEUs. That's basically 20-foot equivalent units in 2020 compared to 1.417 million TEUs in 2019. Now, the sluggish economic activity caused by suppression of demand because of these pandemic restrictions did cause a reduction in the consumption of petroleum products. Consequently, disruption of supply chains resulted in a decline in transshipment traffic in through Kenya and onto East Africa as well. That was down by nearly 17%.
During the pandemic, we went down to, the cargo throughput went down 0.9%, and our containerized cargo went to 4.1%. But so far, we are doing good. We hopefully will be better than what we did last year. The year before, 2019, we should did 1.4 million TEUs against 1.34 this time. So our period looks good at this time. So we hope as it extends, we'll go above our target or performance indicator.
South Africa's marathon run of coronavirus lockdowns and changing curfews have left small businesses struggling to stay on their feet. A high percentage of MSMEs have simply not survived these lockdowns. Many others are holding on to hope that their fortunes will soon change as the country continues to battle the third wave of infections. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the latest.
Bongani Netsele runs a quaint little cafe in Tembisa Township. His restaurant is quiet and orders have dried up since the COVID-19 lockdown started last March. He's left with just a few regulars to get by.
So I've got a number of customers who work late, who normally call you and tell you they need supper, and then you prepare for those things, and normally those people collect food. They don't sit in, they collect and take to work, or they collect, maybe there's a taxi driver who will order food and then you just prepare the food and then they come and collect.
Restrictions have changed to suit the ebb and flow of infections. South Africa's in a third wave. Tighter curfews have put a lid on big parties and kept customers at home.
If somebody wants to do a baby shower or maybe a private party, there's still restrictions. So you can't operate with those things. And with some of the customers that would also want to come back, they are scared now because if they come here and then they get COVID, it's still a problem. The uncertainty has been a nightmare.
Bongani signed up with delivery services and reduced prices to keep his business running. He reluctantly dipped into cash reserves, but that's running out. And he's had little luck with a $50 million relief program for township businesses.
With the help that they said they're offering, it's got a lot of red tapes. I can't access some of the help that they say they're offering because there's things as a business that's more like a survivalist business. There's things that I cannot have. I do have a business account, I do have a registered company, documents, BEE compliant and all of those things, but there's things that I need to have. So it's been a problem.
Up to 60% of small and informal businesses have been forced to close shop over the last year. Many others remain on the back foot with little improvements in the consumer market.
So just the knock-on effects of those initial months themselves, knocked out so many small businesses and others were struggling. So, as things continue, a lot of measures need to be done to make sure that we can revive this vital sector. Businesses turning over between 2 and 5 staff have been the most affected.
Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, further afield, the World Health Organization continues to urge rich countries to help poorer nations by donating significant amounts of their vast stockpiles of COVID-19 vaccinations. The WHO says the world can only be safe if everyone is protected. CGTN's Enoxi Collier speaks to the WHO Kenyan representative.
In the global race to inoculate people with COVID-19 vaccines, Africa is sadly at the back of the pack. The outgoing World Health Organization Kenyan representative Dr. Rudy Eggers says Africa has barely gotten out of the starting blocks.
And this is very important. The danger is to everybody. If you don't protect countries such as Kenya and you get continuing circulation of virus, it means that variants can develop, and even variants that then bypass the existing vaccines. So that's the danger.
At 32 million doses, Africa accounts for less than 1% of the more than 2.1 billion doses administered globally. Just 2% of the continent's nearly 1.3 billion people have received one dose, and only 9.4 million Africans are fully vaccinated. WHO says dose sharing is a do-or-die matter for Africa.
It's really a call to those countries that are manufacturing and are purchasing these vaccines to share that with Kenya and with Africa as a whole. In the current situation, that is the quick fix, the thing that we need at the moment.
South Africa, the continent's most robust economy, has only vaccinated 0.8% of its population, despite having Africa's highest coronavirus caseload. That is according to a worldwide tracker kept by Johns Hopkins University. Hundreds of thousands of South Africa's healthcare workers are still waiting for their shot. Nigeria has only vaccinated 0.1 of its over 200 million people. Uganda has been forced to recall vaccines destined for rural areas because it doesn't have enough to fight outbreaks in big urban centers like the capital of Kampala. The continent of 1.3 billion people is facing a severe vaccine shortage at a time infections are rising. WHO is also banking on China after Sinopharm vaccines were given emergency approval. The super economy from Asia has shown its willingness to help smaller economies inoculate their people.
The Chinese production is actually relatively high, so it will mean that it would provide additional vaccines that we would previously not have. So it will help a lot.
Billionaire British philanthropist Mo Ibrahim, who was born in Sudan, says the pandemic era phrase, "Nobody is safe until everybody is safe," should be the rallying call at this time. Enoxi Collier, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Into North Africa now. Tunisia has hosted the 6th edition of an international exhibition on olive oil and all its derivative products. That particular event was held at the International Fair of Sousse. It had 80 exhibitors taking part. The North African country is one of the leading producers of extra virgin olive oil in the Mediterranean basin and the whole world. Here's Adin Chachi from that event.
30 foreign exhibitors from Spain, Turkey, Italy, Libya, Jordan, Syria, Cameroon and Senegal took part in Medmag Oliva. Olive oil makes up about 50% of Tunisia's agricultural exports, while olive accounts for 15% of the country's agricultural products.
Olive oil is the pillar of Tunisian agriculture. The olive tree is present in each city, in every corner of the country, with more than 24 varieties. The investment climate in this sector is favorable. This exhibition aims to boost Tunisia's olive oil exports to the whole world.
Despite the pandemic, it's been very successful because international exhibitors and guests have come to our country.
Many farms have specialized in producing organic olive oil for the domestic and the international market, especially China. Experts say olive oil exports boost Tunisia's economic growth.
Our company exports organic olive oil to many countries. China is one of the best and most promising markets because there is a growing demand for healthy food. We are producing our golden liquid in the best conditions to guarantee taste and quality. It's an important source of foreign exchange.
Several Tunisian and foreign companies presented the latest technological advances in olive oil production chains and its derivatives like olive oil extraction systems, the conveyor belt and leaf aspirators, as well as the washing machine. In addition, many modern olive crushers, mixers, decanters, as well as the separator and boiler units were sold during the event.
Our company is investing in olive oil technology. We are making modern machines which can press from 12 tons to 120 tons in 24 hours. This is a 100% Turkish product. Taking part in this international exhibition is an opportunity to develop our business. The olive oil season lasts 3 months, but the rest of the year is for marketing, research, and development.
The National Olive Oil Board says Tunisia exported 340,000 tons of olive oil in the 2019-2020 crop year. The exports generated more than $730 million in revenue. That represents 4.25% of Tunisia's budget. The vast majority of these exports were bulk olive oil sales. Exports of packaged olive oil hit 25,000 tons in 2020. This rise is vital for local farmers, as packaged olive oil sales are worth $4.4 per bottle, while olive oil sold in bulk is worth only $2.2 per kilogram. According to the National Institute of Statistics, the olive oil sector employs some 7,000 permanent workers, especially women, throughout the country. This agricultural activity also creates more than 20,000 seasonal jobs each year. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a brief break. Here's what's coming up. The G7 reiterate their pledge to raise $100 billion in funding to help poorer countries cut carbon emissions. We'll have the details. And COVID-19 is ushering different changes to China's tourism sector. We'll explore those when we return.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the bulletin. Let's make a quick run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour, starting in the DRC. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say that a spike in COVID-19 cases there has overwhelmed health facilities in Kinshasa. The city has been recording more than 250 new cases every day. That's the highest daily total since the pandemic began. The country's President Felix Tshisekedi has warned that he may be forced to take drastic measures to curb the spread of this disease. In West Africa, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has acknowledged his government's failure to completely end violence and insecurity in parts of the country. But he says his administration has succeeded in overcoming some of those challenges. Mr. Buhari's statement comes as a West African oil producer commemorates 22 years of civilian rule. And Ethiopia has once again dismissed reports of famine in the northern region of Tigray. The head of the National Disaster Risk Management Commission, Mitiko Kassa, says the government and international aid organizations are providing food, water, fertilizer and selected seeds to the most vulnerable people in the region. That's a run through your headlines. On to the UK now, where the G7 nations ended their summit over the weekend with leaders from that bloc reaffirming their goal to step up action on climate change. The world's 7 most advanced economies renewed a pledge to raise $100 billion a year from public and private sources to help poorer countries cut carbon emissions and cope with global warming. But some green groups are completely unimpressed. After all, they argue, we've heard these pledges before. Greenpeace UK says that the G7 host, the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is simply reheating old promises and that it will take nothing for granted until countries actually come up with the money. Developed nations agreed at the United Nations back in 2009 to together contribute about $100 billion a year in climate funding to poorer countries by 2020. That target was not met in part because of the pandemic. Now let's explore the coal and energy emissions angle to the G7 summit, which wrapped up some 24 hours ago. Vincent McAviney joins us now live from London. So Vincent, the coal side of this summit communique was interesting. Total coal generation capacity worldwide is about 2 terawatt, according to the IEA. 60% of those are less than 20 years old. So if all of these are going to switch away from coal, who will pay for it?
Well, as you mentioned there, the G7 nations reaffirmed their commitment this weekend in Cornwall to, quote, jointly mobilise $100 billion per year from public and private sources through to 2025. Now, they pledged to increase and improve this funding, and we've had Canada, for instance, saying it would double its climate finance pledge to $4.4 billion over the next 5 years, and Germany as well, tripling from 2 to 6 billion euros per year by 2025 in order to meet this target.
All right, then. So at the end of the day, though, the G7 summit does focus, the statement rather from the G7, this focus specifically on thermal coal, the stuff that's used for generating power. But where does this leave other coal-hungry industries, iron, steel, cement companies? They still use a lot of those commodities in everyday use. So what's their alternative in a world where we're saying coal shouldn't be used anymore?
Well, that's not something they were ever going to really dwell too much on at this meeting. The economic sessions on Friday were very much focused on stabilising and rebuilding a fairer global economy after the pandemic. There are alternatives, of course, to coal in steel production. Renewables like electric arc furnaces, for instance, are already responsible for roughly 30% of the world's steel production and don't require coal. Now, this is something they will likely to be saving to go into in more detail at the COP26 climate meeting, which is taking place in Glasgow in Scotland in November.
Since carbon capture tech is still, well, some ways off short of planting a lot more trees, doesn't this essentially imply that for players in natural gas, in wind and in solar and in battery tech, their outlook became just a little bit brighter? Aren't they the likely beneficiaries from coal's demise?
Well, exactly. That's inherent in the strategy of G7 nations. If you look at the UK, for instance, which was the first major nation to formally pledge to cut carbon emissions to zero by 2050, the British government believes that having enshrined that in law, companies will finally feel enough joint pressure to move on from fossil fuels like coal and invest in new wind, solar, and particularly as an island nation, tidal energy. Similarly, with the ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars in the UK in 2030, it's hoped the nudging of the public in the next decade into electric cars will see manufacturers investing further in that battery technology.
One last question for you. So in the 20 years to 2019, basically the first 2 decades of this century, 90% of all new coal power plants are being built in Asia. So even if the G7 does meet this ambitious goal of weaning its entire power system off coal, will that really make a meaningful dent in emissions?
Well, what G7 nations think is that by phasing out their coal power stations themselves, when it comes to encouraging adherence to the Paris Climate Accords and whatever agreement they get out of the COP26 in Glasgow, it gives them a strategic negotiating advantage. They hope that by eradicating coal use, it will mean that they can't be accused of hypocrisy by Asian countries and will help set an example. They'll also be able to point to future breakthroughs from investment in renewable plants, which will make them more efficient and cheaper to construct everywhere.
Indeed, we'll leave it there for the time being. Vincent McAvey in London. Thank you. Now, it's generally known that Africa is endowed with enormous resources. For example, if you're looking at some of the largest platinum deposits in the world, you'll find them in South Africa and Zimbabwe. But the struggle for the control of these resources across the continent has raged on for the better part of a century plus, and it still continues in some ways. The West has been on the spot for invading poor nations to access their natural resources, but there's little evidence of the West's attempt to develop the continent. For instance, recently it emerged that the UK aid to African economies will be slashed by up to 66%. Well, Kirsten Nyabwa takes up that story.
On Saturday, leaders of the G7 countries, some of the world's largest economies, unveiled an infrastructure plan for the developing world. The G7 partnership, dubbed Build Back Better World, aims to finance development projects in developing countries, Africa included. But though the promises sound promising, they are prefaced by a history of the West's scramble for control of Africa's resources, which has often left the continent disenfranchised. The struggle for control over Africa's natural resources has raged since the colonization of the continent. South Africa's potential mineral wealth, for example, is estimated to be around $2.5 trillion, while the mineral reserves of the Democratic Republic of Congo are thought to be worth $24 trillion. The onset of colonialism saw African economies destroyed and fragmented. African countries became providers of raw materials such as unprocessed minerals, timber and agricultural products for the development of other countries. It continues today as the forces that undermine Africa shift from the former colonizers to Western transnational corporations. A 2017 report by a coalition of UK and African equality and development campaigners, including Global Justice Now, found that more wealth leaves Africa every year than enters it. The key factors contributing to this inequality include unjust debt payments and multinational companies hiding proceeds through tax avoidance and corruption. The report argued that the prevailing narrative, where rich country governments say their foreign aid is helping Africa, is a distraction and misleading. It has further emerged that UK aid to individual African countries is being cut by 66% this year. And as the G7 countries mull over the infrastructure project, some experts say transforming aid into a process that genuinely benefits the continent could be more beneficial. And now back to you.
Beatrix Potter's beloved Peter Rabbit is back in the sequel for the 2018 box office hit. Peter Rabbit 2, The Runway, was delayed due to the pandemic. The first installment was one of 2018's top animated releases. It brought in over $300 million worldwide. Here's more on what to expect from the sequel.
Is anyone hungry?
Yeah, starving.
I'm on it.
Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway, sees James Corden voice the mischievous rabbit once again, now a runaway from his farmhouse home to the big city. Although Corden is happy to read the lines, it's the grunts, groans, and pants that he takes umbrage with.
And like sometimes they'll be like, okay, we just get another one. And I'm like, there must be reels and reels of tape of this. But yes, that's the most surreal thing. Although I would say, I think it's more surreal for like Donald Gleason.
Gleason plays Thomas, the husband of Bee, who Peter Rabbit has issues with. Throughout the film, Gleason is involved in a lot of slapstick moments.
My favorite one was the slow motion one where I get hit and you can see the ripples go across my face. And they were trying to do it with a thing on the end of a pole and it wasn't hitting me hard enough. So it ended up with me putting a big blue thing on my hand and smacking myself in the head as hard as I could to make the ripples go across. And that was like a very strange, like literally beating yourself in the head. I do it metaphorically all the time, but doing it literally for a day at work was crazy.
Oh no, Cottontail just discovered sugar. We had a good...
During the interviews for the film, Rose Byrne found herself struggling to speak after eating candy. She's about to film They Are Us, in which she's playing New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Asked how she's feeling taking on the role, Byrne said,
"Oh, thrilled, terrified, all of those things. I've been talking with Andrew for a long time about it, but yeah, she's truly such an inspirational leader, so I just hope I don't stuff it up."
Why are you even helping me?
Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway, is now playing in the U.S. cinemas. Zhang Wengyuan, CGTN.
China's tourism sector continues to roar ahead during the three-day Dragon Boat Festival holiday. But the pandemic continues to change how people travel. Travelers are looking for much shorter stays and in much smaller groups. Zhang Hong reports.
China's tourism industry got its expected bump over the short three-day break. Online travel agency Trip.com reported sales of its personalized trips were up 30% over 2019's numbers. Another online travel service provider, Lumama.com, found a surge in reservations for tours in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, even though those prices of hotels, homestays, and resorts are half again as expensive now as in the off-peak season. The company says it is also noticing changes in people's travel habits.
The reservation volume on our platform during the festival was up significantly compared with the same time last year. More travelers are now choosing to go in smaller groups, from 2 to 8 people, and they're increasingly less likely to join a group with strangers. We've also seen more customers traveling with their kids this time, so we have offered more packages featuring parent-child activities and folklore.
And to avoid crowds, many people are choosing brief trips now rather than trying to hit as many famous places as possible.
We students usually go sightseeing and take some photos nearby after graduation. Nothing too far away.
I prefer driving to places around Shanghai during a short break. If I had time, I would take a longer trip.
We're not going anywhere. We'll just go sightseeing nearby.
High-end hotels have reported plenty of reservations for the holiday, and some travel agencies say the demand for luxury staycations has grown since people have bigger travel budgets now.
So for the Chinese tourists, I think they would prefer to have some stay in the high luxury hotels, even in Shanghai, even in their living cities. So this is a new trend. They can relax and they share the family times, and because for the COVID-19, people have saved a lot for traveling. So I don't think it's a big problem for their budget.
Chen also noted that ongoing events like Shanghai's Flower Expo have further contributed to the growth in the tourism sector. And as good as things have been for this holiday, he says he and his colleagues are expecting the travel market to improve even more as the summer vacation peak season approaches. Zhang Hong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
From life-sized busts of former rulers of ancient Egypt to finely painted copies of their treasured goods, Egypt has inaugurated a factory dedicated to making high-quality replicas of these ancient artifacts, available for pretty much anyone to buy. That's our focus on what's hot tonight.
The 10,000 square meter Canoes factory houses more than 150 skilled artists and conservators. So far, it's produced more than 6,400 replicas made of stones, wood, ceramic, and even gold and silver. Among the most expensive products are life-size replicas of King Tutankhamun's ceremonial chair. It's valued at nearly $9,000. His gold-painted mask costs up to $12,000. Many of the copies will be sold at Egypt's newly inaugurated Egyptian Museum of Civilization.
Our product, it's a copy of the original artifacts. They are made with high-quality materials. We have an example, such as this one, an Anubis, a copy such as this one. It holds the stamp from the High Council of Antiquities, a barcode, and there is a certificate that states this is an exact copy of the original artifact. This is unavailable in ordinary Egyptian markets or with things that are sold in commercial markets. The materials with which these are made are high quality. The highest and most elegant materials are being used to make these samples, and the materials are very close to those used to make the original artifacts.
Authorities have fired a pipeline of projects aimed at attracting tourism. The valuable sector and key source of foreign currency witnessed a painful blow after the pandemic, with revenues plunging by 70% in 2020. Egypt has expressed optimism with regards to the sector's recovery. Authorities say that tourist numbers have gradually increased since January of this year to around 500,000 tourists per month. Ding Siyue, CGTN.
Right, then a quick run through commodity prices. With a focus on oil, Brent has gone as high as $72 a barrel today. That takes its year-to-date gains close, very, very close to 43% so far this year. The margin's even high on WTI crude. Angola is the continent's second largest producer of crude oil. It's also cut its output forecast to just under 1.2 million barrels of crude a day. In fact, output in May was around 1 million barrels of oil every day. So effectively, that makes its May reported output almost sort of the new norm, and that's 400,000 barrels a day less than its average output back in 2019. We're back in 60 seconds with more news.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania. Africa Live. Find your voice.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. One last story for you in the hour. A group of engineers and researchers in Tunisia have developed the country's first autonomous robot that cleans up trash and plastics from the Mediterranean coastline. This autonomous robot can travel for miles from any point of departure, be that a port, a boat or any vessel at sea. CGTN's Adin Chouachi has details on it from Tunis on Grassroots.
This floating vessel was tested by marine and mechanical engineers at the National Institute of Science and Technology of the Sea in the capital city Tunis. The robot is steered from the port by an operator using a controller. 2 solar panels on the top power the machine.
This autonomous robot can clean large areas in a short period of time. The vessel can enter anywhere between boats where humans cannot go to clean the port. Now getting rid of marine debris is possible even in inaccessible areas.
Scientists warn that by the year 2050, the world's seas and oceans are projected to have more plastic fragments than fish. Marine experts say that plastic pollution has been on the rise around the Mediterranean.
Marine pollution is alarming. We can easily see its consequences at any of the beaches in Tunisia and the Mediterranean basin. Wind pushes our trash and plastics away from our shores. We can find our debris in Italy, while trash from Italy is found on the Tunisian coast. The robot will not eliminate all plastics, but it will reduce marine pollution.
The Environment and Quality of Life Department plans to approve the deployment of the device at tourist and commercial ports along the Tunisian coastline.
Tunisia has launched a national strategy to limit plastic pollution from different sources. Our objective is to achieve plastic-free coastlines. Technology is very helpful because autonomous cleaning robots can operate in any weather. The cost of operation is very limited when compared to the deployment of thousands of people to collect plastic on the coastline.
The cleaning system is designed to collect large visible plastic objects, marine litter as well as microplastics. The vessel is fitted with transmitters and sensors, so it can communicate its position to the operator via satellites. The floating robot for eliminating debris was designed to collect trash and plastic and protect the coastline. The development of dozens of robots will be sponsored by the Environment Department and the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
All right, then a quick update as far as currencies are concerned. We did cover the crypto side of things a little earlier in the bulletin, at the very start of the hour, in fact. So let's focus on fiat currencies for now. The Rand still having the best performance on a year-to-date basis so far in the year, up about 6% against the American dollar. The Kenyan shilling up about 1.5% against American dollar. Not much of a change even after the budget was read just last week. The country, of course, did secure a $750 million DPO facility from the World Bank. It's got a bit of a grace period of about 3 or so years, 3.1% interest rate on that particular facility. This is the third time that Kenya's gotten access to this facility. It's designed to give it some fiscal breathing room, if you will, to carry out some much needed reforms to public finances. That's it for the currencies, and that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the course of the hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.